Welcome back, class, and today we're going to be looking at some of the more detailed strategic planning processes. And what I mean by that, today we're going to start looking at analyzing the organization, its capabilities, and what it's going to be needing. Now, if you remember from Chapter 1, we looked at how the environment can influence how HR is able to fulfill its responsibility to put the right people in the right place at the right time, doing the right job. But how do we accommodate the organization when we have a shift in employee status? And what I mean by that, what about those that are retiring? What about those who are terminated? What about those who are transferring, and so forth? We can't just be reactive to all of this, because if we just wait for people to determine what the organization is going to do, then we're going to be in trouble. So what HR is tasked with doing is to be able to forecast what we're going to be needing in the future, but also look at where we're at right now as far as posturing. And that means we're going to have to look at where we're at in relation to our strengths, our weaknesses, the opportunities that are out there, and the threats that can endanger our ability to meet our strategy. So today we're going to take a look, first of all, at how we can analyze an organization. And then we're going to look at forecasting. And then finally we're going to take a look at how organizations can plan for and be able to accommodate the human resource demand, staffing demand, in light of work shortages, which can occur through layoffs or transfers or whatever the case may be. So today, let's start in this area of analysis and work shortage. Well, welcome back, everyone, and today we're going to continue on with the more in-depth consideration of strategic planning. And what I mean by that is that we're going to take a look at doing an analysis of where we're at right now in relation to where we want to be in the future. That's our strategy. We're also going to be taking a look at a concept called forecasting. And forecasting is being able to project out several years as far as what you can realistically predict to happen or hope to happen. And we see that in the Bible. One of my favorite stories is a story of Joseph back in Genesis, where you see Joseph having to give counsel to Pharaoh because God told Joseph that there was going to be a great famine. So they had to plan. Joseph had to forecast what was going to be needed as far as food and grain and so forth to be able to make sure that the Egyptians would be well fed, but also Israel and his fellow brothers. So we see planning, we see forecasting, we see strategy in the Bible, and we should be applying those principles here. Now, some of the principles that I'm going to teach you and that we're going to consider in this chapter as we move along, we're going to notice that there's a lot of similarities with what the secular world has to say about all of this and what the Bible has to say. But let's go ahead and start today with some of the elements of strategic planning. Now, as I said before, the strategy is where you want to be. The planning is how you're going to get there. And we see here with strategic planning the human resource element of it all. And the human resource element of it all is to be able to make sure you have the people involved in that strategy for that organization. So if we defined human resource planning, it would be the analysis and identification of the need for and availability of people so that the organization can meet its strategic objectives. What does that mean? Well, essentially, human resource planning makes sure that the right number of people with the right capabilities at the right times and in the right places are instilled in that organization. That's our responsibility, to make sure all of these elements from a people standpoint are in place. Now, in order to do that, in order to help plan, in order to help forecast, in order to be able to give wise counsel to your ministers or to the organization, you have to analyze where you're at right now. And we do that through what's called a SWOT analysis. Now, a SWOT analysis, if you've never heard the term, SWOT is just an abbreviation. It's an acronym for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you see the diagram here in Figure 2.6. Now, several things you need to know about a SWOT analysis. First of all, strengths and weaknesses. These two elements are internal to the organization. Some strengths may be intellectual capital. It may be loyal, committed employees. You may include innovative, adaptive employees, high performance practices, and so forth. So a strength would be internal. Weakness would be internal. You're seeing here a lack of skilled employees, lack of leadership pipeline, outdated talent management practices. So all of these are internal to the organization here. Now, external. In the external realm, you have what's called opportunities and you have threats. Opportunities might be market position. Where are you postured in that market relative to your competitors? Unexplored markets. And a lot of expansion can take place just by considering, formally sitting down and saying, hey, listen, have we looked at these opportunities in these markets? To be honest with you, one of the things that Philip Morris, which is a reviled company because they make cigarettes, most people can't stand Philip Morris. They decided to expand their market because they knew that their demand for cigarettes was decreasing. So what did they do? They bought Kraft Foods. Now, you may hate cigarettes, but you love the macaroni and cheese. Now, that would be an example of going into unexplored markets that you have never gone into. Global expansion, that is always an opportunity in business. Now, we looked at some of the cost and benefits of going global, and it's not all what it's cracked up to be, but it is a viable and sometimes a necessary option for organizations to engage in. Technology advances. How are you going to leverage technology in the information age? Well, you see today many companies go into automation in just about every facet of their operation. So opportunities are there, and that's external to the environment. Threats, legal mandates and restrictions that can come from local, state, federal legislation. Competitor power that shifts from time to time. Economic uncertainty. Today we live in uncertain times, and that could definitely be a threat to your organization. And then talent shortage. This goes back to what we were talking about a while ago, making sure you have the right number of people in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing with the right qualifications. So anything that could prevent that would be a threat. Now, how do you use a SWOT analysis? Well, a SWOT analysis can be used in anything. You can use it to analyze your department at work. You can use it to analyze your organization. You can use it to analyze your church if you're a pastor, or you can use it to analyze your ministry. Maybe you're a youth pastor or a children's ministry or a counselor. How could you identify all of the things that are going for you and going against you? Well, do a SWOT analysis. I've even seen a SWOT analysis being performed by people who want to buy a house. What do we have going for us in buying a house? What are our weaknesses right now? What are opportunities for a house? And then what can threaten us buying a house? So a SWOT analysis can be used professionally, in the ministry, personally. But what you do is you sit down and understand that a SWOT analysis is just a snapshot. It's just going to show you what is there right now in relation to whatever it is you're analyzing. So it's not a long-range projection. It's not something that has given you any historical, or you're not going to derive any historical data. You're going to look at what is going on right now. And honesty is the key. If you're going to lie, if you're going to embellish, the SWOT analysis is not going to help you. So it's useful to do this by yourself so that you can be completely honest in your responses. But once you have all of your strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats, and there's no magic number, there's no minimum, and there's no maximum for each of these dimensions. You sit down and you write out what you consider to be a strength and a weakness and an opportunity and a threat. And also know, too, that a strength can be a weakness. You may have a large business, and that may be a strength. But if that business is so big that you can't respond to customer demand, then it's a weakness. So you can have the same item in one or two or three or all of these dimensions. It's rare to have it in all four, but you definitely can have a strength which is a weakness. Now, once you have listed all of the items in each of these dimensions or categories, then you want to start matching up and planning your strategy. So how can I use a strength right now to, let's say, take advantage of an opportunity? What if I wanted to use my employees to maybe reach out and us try to develop market potential or market position? How can I use innovation to be able to take advantage of technology? And how could a weakness here be exploited by a threat? What about competitor power? What if they have a lot of skilled employees, but I lack skilled employees? What about the threat of talent shortage? What if my worker pool, let's say for instance, what if my worker pool has been depleted? Or we have in the environment people wanting to go into different fields. So I may have a lack of people coming into the leadership pipeline. Well, how can I use a strength to maybe offset some of these threats so that they don't become overwhelming with my weaknesses? So you may want to incorporate your high performance practice into your competitors' power. You might want to outperform them, so forth. And how can weaknesses prevent me from taking advantage of an opportunity, and so forth and so on. So what you're doing, as you see here, is you're going up and down. You're matching strengths with opportunities. You're looking at strengths in relation to offsetting threats. You're looking at strengths overcoming weaknesses and so forth. So when you have all of these connections made, then you can go from there developing a strategy. Well, we want to, first of all, leverage our high performance practice here. And we want to make sure that our high performance practice will offset any type of competition power that may come our way. And you go from there. So a SWOT analysis is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it is a snapshot of the present as far as where you're at right now. Strengths and weaknesses are internal. Opportunities and threats are external. Now, succession planning. Succession planning is looking for those to replace those in positions of power. It's the process of identifying a plan for the orderly replacement of key employees. So we know that employees are not going to be there forever. So we need to make plans in replacing those individuals down the line. It's hard on an organization when someone leaves and you don't have a replacement for them. You put undue hardship on others. You create an environment of confusion, and you really are losing productivity because other employees now are having to learn as they go. They don't have the learning curve advantages that the previous employee had. So they're not only doing their job, they're having to do other people's jobs, and they're having to learn those jobs as they go. So succession planning is having a plan in place to replace employees who will be leaving in the next year or 2 or 3 or down the road. Now, there are factors affecting external workforce availability, and let's take a look at some of those. First of all, you have the economic and governmental factors, and we talked about the impact of the government and how the economy can influence the productivity of an organization. Government regulations affect labor supply. As we see here with the Civil Rights Act and with all different types of legislation, governments have become more restrictive in how we as employers can treat employees. Just because we don't like a person or just because a person doesn't suit our idea of right or wrong, we can't discriminate. So we have to uphold government regulations, tax legislation, local, state, and federal levels. As governments tax the worker, the workplace or the organization, it makes it that much harder for HR to be able to facilitate compensation, benefits, and other things that would motivate the worker. There's geographic competitive evaluations, and what we mean by that is the number of migrations. People are moving to and fro. A lot of people here in the South, when they are old enough to leave home, they're gone. I know as soon as I turned 18, I wanted to get out of the South. I wanted to see the world. So you have a lot of people doing that. So you may have a lot of people that will go to college down here, but yet there may not be the opportunities here that they would have maybe in the West or in the North or whatever. So you have the migration of people going out of the South, and you have the integration of people who are coming to these areas of opportunity. And how do you make an accommodation for them? There's only so many jobs to go around. So whether they're coming or going, that's going to affect the workforce availability. You have direct competitors. Now, don't think that your competitors are not going to try to get the cream of the crop themselves. So you have to be competitive with what your rivals are offering the employees. If it's salary, you need to be competitive with the salary. If it's benefits, you need to be competitive with benefits. Sometimes just the work environment itself. I know a lot of people who work for Federal Express, they say, I don't get a lot of money, but the benefits outweigh the lack of revenue coming in. So what is it that you're going to provide for the employee to make them want to come and work for you? And then not only that, you have international competition. There are a lot of organizations, especially overseas right now in Japan and Germany, that are offering all types of incentives and wage increases and so forth, and the prospect of going to a foreign land. Those are things that you've got to take into consideration. And then we have to look at the changing workforce consideration. We have an aging workforce right now. And as I said earlier, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act ensures that nobody can be discriminated against, especially if they're 70 or older. So we have that to contend with, and because of that, we have a bottleneck in a lot of organizations. People are not leaving as they used to, and there's no mobility for a lot of people who are trying to move up in the organization. So that's a big consideration today. And then you have the growing diversity of workers. And we're not just looking at age, we're looking at race, we're looking at gender, we're looking at disabilities, all types of religion, all types of diversity is out there now that we have to accommodate. Female workers and work-life balancing concerns. It used to be a woman had a choice, either be a wife and a mom or be a professional person, and they had to make that choice. Today, organizations are trying to accommodate both. You can stay at home and be a mom, and then you can also be a professional too. And they do that through alternative career paths. They do that through creative scheduling and so forth. And it makes sense to be able to do that because some of your greatest talent may be from the female pool. And if you give them an ultimatum, you either work or stay home, either or, it would be unfortunate to lose a good employee who can really contribute much for the sake of them just wanting to be home for a while with their babies. So we can work around that today, and that's what we try to do. Availability of contingent workers, and when we look at that, we're looking at temporary workers, workers who are not there full time, but they're there for a period of time, and then outsourcing the work itself. And we saw yesterday where offshoring is a option for some companies. Outsourcing is pretty much the same thing. You have a third-party vendor who will come and do the work that you would normally do for that. Now, there are also factors affecting internal workforce availability, and that's the current and future job audit. And to do that, you take a look at what you've got right now. What jobs do you have that serve as the core for your company's existence? And then the number of individuals performing each job. It may be that you would need to shift them around to be able to expand the scope of their work. But you also have reporting relationships. Those are changing as we empower workers today. We're giving them more authority and autonomy to be able to complete the tasks. And then vital KSAs, and I mentioned that before, KSAs are knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes that are necessary for that person to do the job. And then jobs needed to implement future organizational strategies. As you forecast the future, as you see how your company is evolving, what job requirements are going to be evolving, what job positions will be either going away or being added to the organization, and you need to be able to plan for that. And then the characteristics of those anticipated jobs. What are going to be the job descriptions? What are going to be the KSAOs needed to be able to complete that job? So those are some of the issues that you're going to be facing when it comes to the internal workforce availability. And then you have employee and organizational capabilities inventory. And this is where you take a look at the employee demographics. Who do you have? And that's important to note because you have the issue of what we're going to look at later on, procedural and distributive justice. Are you making an opportunity for everybody to take advantage of your rewards and promotions and so forth? Career progression. How are you going to plan out the career path of those who are going to be loyal and stay? And then performance data. Performance data give you the pretty much the basics of what the people are doing. And oftentimes the technology that we have in HR today, you can compile a profile of a person, their demographics, their career progression, their performance data. And if you have a position coming up, let's say in 6 months or a year, you can type in those characteristics of that job and names will come up from just what you have inputted into that database. So using technology today to help inventory people is a vast vast improvement from what we used to have in the past, and it's an effective and efficient means of being able to manage your workforce. Now, forecasting. Now, we've mentioned it several times already, but forecasting is using information from the past to present, or past and present, to predict future conditions. Testing 1, 2. Forecasting. Now, forecasting, we've mentioned it earlier, but forecasting is using information from the past and present to predict future conditions. And really what we're doing is taking a look at what we've done to be able to kind of gauge what we can expect in the future. You know, weathermen do it, not that accurately, but they forecast the weather looking at past weather patterns, and looking at past weather patterns they can predict, or at least try to predict, what's going to happen in the future. And that's what you do as an HR professional, especially when it comes to strategy and strategic planning. You're going to help forecast the needs, especially personnel needs, for those in that organization. Now, there are different models that you can use that are going to be out there, and we'll take a look at a few of them as we move along in the course. But it's enough to know right now that part of HR's responsibility is to be able to predict future conditions based on an analysis of the past. Now, you have forecast planning periods, and you have short, intermediate, and long-range plans. Short-range plans, as you see here, they just look at the immediate needs of an organization. If you need 20 employees to replace some that have left the organization, that would be a short-range plan. But what about intermediate plans? These go 1 to 3 years into the future. Now, we saw a couple of sessions ago, the short-term to intermediate strategy. That's the range of your strategy, and that's usually 3 to 5 years. But anything past 3 years, you're starting to get into long-range plans, and that's extended beyond 3 years, and it's usually on average about 3 to 5 years as you start to take a look at the long-range goals. You have to accommodate, and this is the juggling act that you have to perform. You're making sure that your short-range plans are being adhered to while you're trying to move ahead with intermediate range plans to be able to reach your long-range plans. So you see a lot of times a juggling act, making sure that you're maintaining the status quo while trying to move forward to eventually get to your long-range objectives. Now, what we have here is just a simple formula. If you notice here, the formula for estimating labor supply is that you have the current staffing level, this is how many you have right now, minus the number of people you're expecting to leave, and then you add how many you're projecting to come in for that particular year. And then what you see here is the internal supply for next year. Simple math. You take what you have minus what you expect to lose plus what you expect to gain, and then that will be your supply. And then you have here the source of inflows. You have here external hires. That's just going out into the environment and soliciting people to come in. You can have internal transfers, people moving from one job to the next. You can promote them. You can recall them. People who have been maybe laid off, you can bring them in. And then you have demotions, people who are not performing at the level you want them to, they can be dropped a level or two. And then you have sources of inflow or outflows, promotions, turnovers, terminations, demotions again, retirements, death, layoff. See all of the factors there that can cause you to lose people. So that juggling act that you're going to be doing as far as planning will also occur as you try to balance your source of inflows with your source of outflows. And then what you see here, as the slide indicates, and I'm just adding to it, is the current staffing level. So this is what you want to have in balance, the current staffing level at any given time. If you have too many, you're going to have to lay off. If you don't have enough, then you've got a talent shortage and your productivity is going to decrease as a result of it. Now, unfortunately, layoffs do happen. And what I try to communicate to students, especially at the master's level who are already in decision-making positions, one of the last things you want to do is lay people off, but usually it's one of the first responses. Why is it so bad to lay people off? Well, when you lay people off, you're getting rid of what we call the learning curve advantage. Those workers who have been there, and some of them for years, know the best way of doing that job. They know the most effective and the most efficient way of doing that job. When they leave, that goes out the door. And oftentimes they'll go to your competitor and give them all the secrets and all of the abilities and give them the benefits of what you've invested in. Also, too, when you leave that much of an opening, when you have a massive layoff, you stand to lose what's called economies of scale. Economies of scale is a position that everybody wants to obtain when you're in business. For instance, Walmart. Walmart does not pay what Pepsi wants Walmart to pay for their products. Walmart, because they have become so big and successful, can force concessions out of Pepsi so that they can buy Pepsi in volume, but at a very, very reduced price. Now, your mom and pop stores can't buy in volume, not like Walmart can. So they're going to have to pay normal price or more than normal because the Pepsi's not going to lose money. So when you take away the people, you risk having those economies of scale compromised because you're not as big and you're not going to be as efficient as you used to be. When you're on top, you can dictate to the supplier how much you're going to pay. But when you're at the bottom or you're struggling and you're not running at peak efficiency, then the supplier can dictate what you're going to pay. And the more you pay, the more you have to charge. And this is why Walmart undersells everybody, because they can buy in volume cheaper, and if they buy it cheaper, they can sell it cheaper. So that's how you stay in business. But when you lay people off and you get rid of your employees, you lose all of those advantages. Now, some of the other ways of carrying out layoffs is to identify the work that is core to sustaining a profitable business, and that's just common sense. Know what you have to maintain and know what you can sacrifice. Identify the knowledge, skills, competencies, the KSAOs needed to execute the business strategy. Protect the bottom line and the corporate brand, and constantly communicate with employees. Now that's a tricky strategy, because when you start to let the employees know that, hey, we're running into hard times, many of them will be right out the door looking for something else. So you don't want to withhold, and you certainly don't want to deceive anyone. But they need to know that if you are in trouble, these are the steps that we're going to take first before we lay anybody off. We're going to reduce the amount of overtime or do away with it altogether. No weekend work now. And promotions or raises, we're going to freeze those right now so that they know, well, I can expect to not get a raise, but hey, I've got a job. and they have been communicating with me. That puts them at ease and really endears them to you as much as trust goes and so forth. And then pay attention to the survivors. One of the hard things that you have to deal with are those that are left still working. There's a feeling of guilt, there's a feeling of mistrust, there's a sense of low morale and so forth. Even though they're glad to have a job, many of them are scared that they're going to be next. There was one company that did a progression of layoffs. Every Friday they were laying a group off, and no one knew until that Friday who it was that was going to be, terminated. What a horrible position to put the employees in, as each week they went not knowing if they were going to have a job the next week. So there is a practical side where you have to protect the company, but you also have an ethical responsibility to make sure you're communicating with the employees and you are trying as best you can to encourage and motivate those that are still around. Now, severance benefits and outplacement services. These are really some of the resources that HR incorporates to help those who are going to be out of work. Many will get kind of severance pay to ease the financial burden of unemployment. Some have outplacement services, which will help the employee find other means of work. And as you see here, there's a personal career counseling, resume preparation, interviewing workshops, referral assistance. I don't know of many who actually do all of that. I mean, it's good on the slide and good at the textbook, but I have really not seen many who have incorporated all of that to help the employee. Most of the organizations, if they're laying off, that means they're in financial straits at that point, and they probably can't afford to retain these types of professionals to help employees. But these are options that you have at your disposal to be able to go ahead and help the employee transition. Managing talent shortage. Well, there's alternate work arrangements, and I mentioned that earlier with female employees. If you want to retain workers, whether it be a single mom or maybe it's a person who is going to college full-time or whatever, you can have non-traditional schedules that provide flexibility to employees. That means you can have what we call split schedules. Two people work 1 8-hour shift. One goes in for 4 hours, the other goes in for the other 4 hours. There are also different types. Instead of working during the day, you can work at night. You can work from home. These are all non-traditional methods to be able to manage the people that you have and allow them to be able to produce and still stay effective. Outsourcing, we talked about that, having a third party come in and do the work that you would normally do. Now, the benefit to outsourcing is that you don't have to pay a full-time employee anymore to do it. That means during good times or bad times, it makes no difference. Those employees work for another firm. So you can always, when times are good, have that outsourced entity produce at a greater frequency and a greater volume. But when things are bad, you can always tell that vendor, hey, we need to decrease the amount of whatever it is that you're producing. So you have that freedom. The one thing that you don't have freedom with when it comes to outsourcing is the quality of the product and the timing of the product. I said one thing, but actually it's two. You can't always oversee the production, so quality is going to be an issue, and making sure that they deliver on time, that's another issue as well. So there are certain things you gain, but there are also things that you lose with outsourcing. Now, Figure 210 just gives you an idea of how to manage a talent shortage, and you can use overtime, you can outsource the work, try alternative work arrangements, we talked about that, bring back recent retirees, you can increase the number of temps, and then you can reduce turnover, and turnover is something that you want to reduce as much as possible anyway, especially if the ones who are leaving are good quality people. If they are not, then don't worry about them. Let them go. You're better off without them. But for your good workers, you need to try to retain them as much as possible and offer incentives and offer, maybe if you can't afford bonuses, give them extra time off or maybe more vacation time or whatever. But these are some of the ways that you can manage a talent shortage. Well, today we looked at what a SWOT analysis entails. We saw it as the ability to look at, with a snapshot view, the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats that an organization faces. We also saw the different uses for a SWOT analysis, but also we took a look at how companies can accommodate the shortages of talent that may occur when you have layoffs or when you have economic conditions that require you to downsize, and also when you have people transferring in and out of the organization. So hopefully today you can gain an appreciation of the demand that HR has to fulfill when it comes to putting the right people in the right place at the right time, doing the right job for the organization. Well, tomorrow we're going to finish up Chapter 2 as we examine some more elements of strategy and strategic planning. So until then, God bless you, have a good day in the Lord, and I'll see you tomorrow.